Welcome back to the Historian's Tome, where history becomes your gentle companion into the realm of dreams. I'm your narrator, and tonight we embark on a tranquil journey through time to explore one of East Asia's most remarkable civilizations, the Silla Kingdom of ancient Korea. Before we begin this peaceful voyage through Korea's golden age, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Your support helps us continue crafting these historical lullabies that transform learning into the most restful part of your day. As you settle into your comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow and deepen. Tonight, we'll drift through nearly 1,000 years of Korean history, from the misty origins of Silla in 57 BCE to its peaceful transition in 935 CE. Let the weight of the day dissolve as we explore ancient palaces, sacred temples, and the lives of kings and queens who shaped a civilization that would influence all of East Asia. Close your eyes and let us begin our journey to the land of the morning calm, where cherry blossoms once fell like snow on golden pagodas, and where the echoes of ancient wisdom still whisper through the mountain valleys of Gyeongju. In the southeastern corner of the Korean peninsula, where gentle mountains embrace fertile valleys and crystal streams flow toward the East Sea, a kingdom was born in legend and nurtured by the wisdom of its people. The year was 57 BCE, and in the small settlement that would one day become the magnificent capital of Seorabeol, later known as Gyeongju, the first seeds of the Silla Kingdom were planted. Picture, if you will, a land where morning mists clung to ancient pine forests, and the sound of temple bells echoed across terraced rice fields. This was the realm where Park Hyeokgeos, the legendary founder of Silla, first emerged from a mysterious purple egg found beneath a sacred horse. Whether born of divine intervention or human ambition, this mythical beginning speaks to the deep spiritual connection the Silla people felt with their land. The early Silla Kingdom was not yet the unified power it would become, but rather one of several competing states in what historians call the Three Kingdoms period. Alongside Goguryeo in the north and Baekje in the southwest, Silla began as a confederation of tribal communities, each led by chieftains who gradually acknowledged the growing authority of the Silla kings. In these formative centuries, the people of Silla developed their unique culture, blending indigenous Korean traditions with influences from China and eventually Buddhism. The fertile valleys provided abundant rice harvests, while the coastal waters offered fish and seaweed. Trade routes connected Silla to distant lands, bringing silk, spices, and new ideas that enriched the kingdom's cultural tapestry. The social structure of early Silla was complex and hierarchical, built around a bone rank system that would persist throughout the kingdom's history. This system, known as Golpum, divided society into distinct classes based on birth, with the sacred bone rank reserved for royalty and the highest nobility. Below them were various levels of true bone aristocrats, followed by commoners and slaves. While rigid by modern standards, this system provided stability and order during Silla's vulnerable early centuries. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine walking through an ancient Silla village at dawn. Thatched roof houses line narrow earthen paths, smoke rises gently from cooking fires, and farmers tend to their fields with wooden tools passed down through generations. Children play games with stones and sticks, while their mothers weave beautiful textiles on simple looms. The pace of life is unhurried, measured by the seasons and the cycles of planting and harvest. The early kings of Silla ruled from modest palaces, their power balanced by tribal councils and shamanic priests who served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds. These rulers, both men and women, understood that their authority came not just from military might or political cunning, but from their ability to maintain harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. Buddhism had not yet taken root in Silla soil during these early centuries. But the people's spiritual life was rich with indigenous beliefs. Sacred groves dotted the landscape, where ancient trees were revered as dwelling places of spirits. Mountain peaks were considered the abodes of gods, and rivers were seen as pathways between the mortal and divine realms. Let the gentle rhythm of this ancient world lull you deeper into peace. Feel the soft earth beneath your feet as you walk the paths of early Seorabeol. Hear the distant sound of water flowing over smooth stones, and breathe in the clean mountain air that once filled the lungs of Silla's founding generations. As centuries passed like slow-moving clouds across the Korean sky, Silla entered one of the most remarkable periods in its history, an era when women held the highest throne and guided the kingdom through times of both triumph and challenge. This was the age of the sacred bone queens, when three extraordinary women ruled Silla with wisdom, courage, and an almost mystical connection to their people's destiny. The first of these remarkable rulers was Queen Seondeok, who ascended to the throne in 632 CE. In an age when female rulership was rare across the world, Silla embraced the leadership of women with a reverence that spoke to the kingdom's unique spiritual and cultural values. Queen Seondeok was not merely a figurehead, but a true sovereign who understood the delicate balance between diplomacy and strength, between tradition and innovation. Picture her royal court in the heart of Seorabeol, where silk banners flutter in the gentle breeze and courtiers move with the graceful precision of a carefully choreographed dance. The architecture of the palace reflects the harmony that Silla sought to achieve. Low, elegant buildings with curved roof lines that seem to embrace the sky, surrounded by gardens where lotus blossoms float. Serenely in reflecting pools, Queen Seondeok possessed what her people called divine insight, an almost supernatural ability to predict events and understand the hidden currents of politics and nature. Legend tells us that she could determine the exact timing of spring's arrival by observing the behavior of animals and the subtle changes in plant growth. Her subjects believed she could communicate with the spirits of the ancestors and receive guidance from the heavens themselves. During her reign, Buddhism flourished in Silla as never before. The queen became a devoted patron of the faith, commissioning the construction of magnificent temples and supporting the translation of sacred texts. The most famous of these projects was Hwangryongsa Temple, once one of the largest wooden structures in East Asia. Imagine this magnificent complex rising from the earth like a vision from paradise. Its 9-story pagoda stretching toward the clouds, its golden bells ringing across the capital with voices of peace and enlightenment. After Queen Seondeok's peaceful death in 647, her cousin Princess Jindeok ascended to the throne as Queen Jindeok. Though her reign lasted only 7 years, she continued the policies of her predecessor, maintaining Silla's growing influence while nurturing the kingdom's cultural and spiritual development. The transition between these queens was marked not by violence or political upheaval, but by ceremonies that honored both the departing and arriving rulers. The final sacred bone queen was Queen Jinsong, who ruled much later, from 887 to 897 CE. By her time, Silla had reached its golden age and was beginning to face the challenges that would eventually lead to its transformation. Yet she too embodied the wisdom and grace that characterized female leadership in Silla. These queens understood that true power lay not in commanding through fear, but in inspiring through example. They were patrons of the arts, supporters of Buddhism, and protectors of their people's welfare. Under their guidance, Silla developed a sophisticated court culture that valued poetry, music, and philosophical discourse alongside military prowess and political acumen. The daily life of these royal women was structured around both ceremonial duties and practical governance. Dawn would find them in meditation or prayer, seeking guidance for the day's decisions. Morning hours were devoted to audiences with officials, listening to reports from distant provinces, and making judgments on matters of law and administration. Afternoons might be spent in the palace gardens, consulting with scholars and monks, or reviewing architectural plans for new temples and public works. As evening approached, the queens would often participate in cultural activities, listening to court musicians perform on the Gyeongju, a traditional Korean zither, or enjoying poetry recitations by visiting scholars. These weren't mere entertainments, but expressions of the Silla belief that rulers should embody the highest achievements of their civilization. Let yourself be carried into peaceful slumber by the gentle wisdom of these ancient queens. Imagine yourself in their palace gardens at twilight, where paper lanterns cast soft light on flowering trees and the sound of wind chimes mingles with distant temple bells. Feel the serenity that comes from knowing you are in the presence of leaders who ruled with both strength and compassion, who understood that true power serves the greater good. As the 7th century dawned over the Korean peninsula, Silla stood at the threshold of its greatest triumph and most challenging ordeal. The long-standing balance between the three kingdoms, Silla, Goguryeo, and Baekje, was beginning to shift, and the dream of unification that had stirred in Korean hearts for centuries was about to become reality through the vision and determination of one of history's most remarkable kings, King Munmu, who would later be remembered as one of Korea's greatest rulers. Understood that Silla's survival and prosperity depended on uniting the peninsula under one crown. But this would not be achieved through conquest alone. It required a delicate combination of military strategy, diplomatic brilliance, and cultural synthesis that would honor the best traditions of all three kingdoms. Picture the Korean peninsula in those days as a patchwork of kingdoms, each with its own customs, dialects, and sacred places. Goguryeo in the north was a powerful military state that had successfully resisted Chinese invasions for centuries. Baekje in the southwest was renowned for its sophisticated court culture and artistic achievements. And Silla in the southeast had developed its unique blend of Buddhism, indigenous spirituality, and administrative efficiency. The unification began not with massive battles, but with careful diplomatic maneuvering. King Munmu first formed an alliance with Tang China, a decision that would prove both crucial and problematic. The Chinese emperors, eager to extend their influence over the peninsula, provided military support for Silla's campaigns against Baekje and Goguryeo. The first major victory came in 660 CE with the fall of Baekje. Picture this moment not as a scene of destruction, but as a careful transition orchestrated by Silla's enlightened leadership. Rather than destroying Baekje's cultural achievements, Silla incorporated them into its expanding kingdom. Baekje scholars found places in Silla's administration. Baekje artisans continued their work under new patronage, and Baekje traditions were woven into the growing tapestry of unified Korean culture. The conquest of Goguryeo in 668 CE was more challenging, requiring 8 years of careful campaigns and diplomatic pressure. But again, King Munmu's approach emphasized integration over domination. The proud warriors of Goguryeo were welcomed into Silla's armies, their military traditions strengthening the United Kingdom's defenses. The scholarly traditions of Goguryeo, with their deep connections to Chinese classical learning, enriched Silla's intellectual life. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this unification was how Silla handled its Chinese allies. Once the peninsula was united, it became clear that Tang China intended to establish direct control over the former kingdoms. But King Munmu, with characteristic wisdom and patience, gradually expelled Chinese forces without provoking a devastating war. By 676 CE, Korea was truly independent and unified for the first time in its history. Imagine the celebrations that must have swept across the peninsula when news of complete unification spread from village to village. Temple bells rang from the mountains of the former Goguryeo territory to the coastal plains where Baekje had flourished. In Seorabil, now the capital of all Korea, people from every corner of the peninsula came together to witness the dawn of a new era. The process of creating a truly unified state required more than military victory. King Munmu and his successors had to develop new administrative systems that could govern the expanded territory effectively. They established a network of provinces and counties, each administered by officials chosen through a combination of aristocratic birth and demonstrated competence. The unification also required cultural synthesis on an unprecedented scale. Silla had to become more than just an enlarged version of its former self. It had to become a kingdom that honored the traditions of all three kingdoms, while forging a new, distinctly Korean identity. This process unfolded gradually over generations, like the slow growth of a mighty tree that sends its roots deep into ancient soil while stretching its branches toward new horizons. Buddhism played a crucial role in this cultural unification. The religion, which had developed somewhat differently in each kingdom, provided a common spiritual framework that could transcend the old political boundaries. Monks and scholars traveled freely throughout the peninsula, sharing texts, debating philosophical questions, and establishing new temples that served pilgrims from all regions. As you drift towards sleep, let yourself be transported to a unified Silla celebration. Picture lantern festivals where people from former Goguryeo, Baekje, and original Silla territories gather together, their regional differences gradually dissolving into shared joy and common purpose. Listen to the sound of traditional music that blends instruments and melodies from all three kingdoms, creating something entirely new, yet deeply rooted in ancient traditions. With unification achieved, Silla entered its golden age, and nowhere was this more evident than in the magnificent capital city of Seorabeol. Once a modest settlement nestled between gentle hills, it had grown into one of Asia's great cities, with a population that some historians estimate reached nearly 1 million people at its height. This made it larger than contemporary Constantinople, and rivaled only by the greatest Chinese capitals. As dawn breaks over this ancient metropolis, imagine yourself standing on one of the surrounding hills, gazing down at a city that sparkles like a jewel in the morning light. The layout of Seorabeol followed the principles of Chinese urban planning, but adapted them to Korean sensibilities and the natural landscape. Wide boulevards radiated from the royal palace at the city's heart, while smaller streets wound through neighborhoods like gentle streams finding their path to the sea. The palace complex itself was a wonder of ancient architecture. Unlike the imposing vertical structures favored in China, Silla's royal buildings embraced a horizontal aesthetic that seemed to grow naturally from the earth. Red-pillared pavilions with gracefully curved roofs were connected by covered walkways that offered protection from rain and snow while allowing residents to enjoy views of carefully tended gardens. In these gardens, the Silla kings and queens had created earthly paradises that reflected Buddhist concepts of harmony and balance. Artificial hills dotted the landscape, each one carefully positioned according to principles of feng shui to channel beneficial spiritual energy throughout the palace. Ponds, shaped like the Korean peninsula, were stocked with colorful carp, while rare flowers imported from across Asia bloomed in succession throughout the seasons. The daily routine of palace life moved with the rhythm of ancient ceremony and practical governance. Before dawn, palace servants would begin preparing for the day's activities, sweeping courtyards, lighting incense in shrine rooms, and preparing the elaborate meals that would sustain the royal household. The king or queen would rise early for private meditation and consultation with trusted advisors before the formal business of ruling began. Beyond the palace walls, Seorabeol hummed with the activity of hundreds of thousands of residents, representing every level of society. The city was divided into distinct districts, each with its own character and function. The aristocratic quarter featured mansions almost as grand as the palace itself, where high-ranking nobles lived in luxury that would have impressed visitors from any contemporary civilization. The merchant districts were perhaps the most vibrant areas of the city. Here, traders from across Asia converged to exchange goods that had traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road and maritime trade routes. Persian carpets lay beside Chinese silks, while Japanese swords were displayed next to Indian spices and Arabian perfumes. The air was filled with a dozen languages, and the aromatic blend of foods from across the known world. Craftsmen's quarters specialized in the production of goods that made Silla famous throughout East Asia. Korean metalworkers had achieved remarkable skill in creating both practical items and works of art. Their swords were prized by warriors from Japan to Central Asia, while their bronze bells produced sounds of such clarity and beauty that they were sought by Buddhist temples across the region. The pottery workshops of Silla Kingdom created ceramics that combined Korean aesthetic sensibilities with techniques learned from Chinese masters. Silla pottery was characterized by its subtle colors and elegant forms, pieces that seemed to capture the gentle beauty of the Korean landscape in clay and glaze. Perhaps most impressive were the city's temples, which served not only as places of worship, but as centers of learning, art, and social service. Gyeongju Temple, located just outside the city, was considered one of the architectural marvels of its age. Its careful integration with the natural landscape exemplified the Silla approach to Buddhism, a faith that embraced the world rather than rejecting it. The streets of Silla were alive with festivals throughout the year, celebrations that brought together people from all walks of life. The Lotus Lantern Festival, held each spring, transformed the entire city into a constellation of colored lights. Thousands of paper lanterns, each one representing a prayer or wish, were carried through the streets in processions that lasted from sunset until dawn. During the Autumn Harvest Festival, the boundaries between social classes temporarily dissolved, as everyone participated in Thanksgiving ceremonies and communal feasts. Even slaves were given special privileges during these celebrations, reflecting the Buddhist teaching that all beings possess the potential for enlightenment. The intellectual life of Silla rivaled that of any contemporary city. The palace maintained an extensive library where scholars from across Asia came to study and debate. These learned men and women not only preserved classical texts, but created new works of poetry, philosophy, and historical scholarship that would influence Korean culture for centuries to come. During the height of Silla's golden age, Buddhism reached a level of sophistication and influence that transformed not only religious practice, but every aspect of Korean civilization. This was an era when Korean Buddhist scholars achieved recognition throughout East Asia, when magnificent temples rose like sacred mountains from the Korean landscape, and when the principles of Buddhist compassion and wisdom became deeply embedded in the kingdom's culture and governance. The Buddhism that flourished in unified Silla was uniquely Korean in character, having evolved from its Indian origins through Chinese interpretation into something that perfectly suited the Korean temperament and landscape. Korean Buddhists emphasized the harmony between spiritual enlightenment and active engagement with the world, rejecting the extreme asceticism that characterized some forms of the religion in other countries. Picture yourself approaching Gyeongju Temple on a misty morning, when the ancient structure seems to emerge from the hillside like a vision from the Pure Land itself. This architectural masterpiece, begun in 751 CE and completed over several decades, represents the pinnacle of Silla Buddhist art and engineering. Every element of the temple was designed to teach spiritual lessons. The gradual approach up stone staircases symbolizes the soul's journey toward enlightenment, while the careful placement of buildings creates a mandala-like sacred space. The temple's most famous treasures are its stone pagodas, particularly Dabotap and Seokatap, which stand like eternal guardians in the main courtyard. These structures, carved from local granite with exquisite precision, represent different aspects of Buddhist teaching. Seokatap, with its simple, elegant lines, embodies the clarity and directness of enlightened wisdom, while the more ornate Dabotap celebrates the infinite diversity and creativity of the enlightened mind. Within the temple halls, golden Buddha statues gazed serenely upon generations of worshippers, their faces reflecting the artistic synthesis of Indian spiritual ideals, Chinese cultural influence, and Korean aesthetic sensibility. The largest statue, cast in bronze and covered with gold leaf, was said to have been modeled on the features of a Silla king who had renounced his throne to become a monk. The daily rhythm of temple life provided a model of harmonious community that influenced secular society. Throughout Silla, monks rose before dawn for meditation and chanting, their voices creating a peaceful sound that carried across the surrounding valleys. After morning prayers, they engaged in various activities, some studying ancient texts in the temple library, others teaching in schools for local children, still others working in the temple gardens or maintaining the complex network of buildings and courtyards. Buddhist education in Silla reached unprecedented heights during this period. The kingdom's monasteries served as universities where both monks and lay people could study not only religious texts but also literature, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and the arts. Korean Buddhist scholars made original contributions to philosophical debates that engaged thinkers across East Asia. The most famous of these scholars was Wonyo, a monk whose commentaries on Buddhist scriptures were studied in China and Japan, as well as Korea. Wonyo's approach emphasized the fundamental unity underlying apparently different schools of Buddhist thought, and his writings demonstrated a remarkable ability to make complex philosophical concepts accessible to ordinary people. Another influential figure was Uisang, who founded the Korean school of Hwayun Buddhism and established a network of temples that became centers of learning and spiritual practice. Uisang's teachings emphasized the interconnectedness of all phenomena, a concept that resonated deeply with Korean sensibilities and influenced everything from art and poetry to political philosophy. The influence of Buddhism extended far beyond the monasteries and temples. Silla's legal system incorporated Buddhist concepts of karma and compassion, leading to more humane treatment of criminals and greater concern for social welfare. The kingdom established hospitals, orphanages, and shelters for travelers, all funded and operated according to Buddhist principles of universal compassion. Buddhist festivals became central features of Silla's cultural calendar. The celebration of Buddha's birthday each spring transformed cities and villages throughout the kingdom into displays of devotion and joy. Lotus lanterns bloomed like flowers throughout the streets, while temple bells rang in harmony with the songs of pilgrims who had traveled from distant provinces to participate in the celebrations. The visual arts flourished under Buddhist patronage, creating a distinctive Korean Buddhist aesthetic that influenced artistic development for centuries. Painters developed new techniques for depicting Buddhist subjects, creating works that combined the spiritual intensity of religious art with the natural beauty that Koreans found in their landscape. Sculptors carved Buddha images and bodhisattvas that perfectly balanced divine majesty with human compassion. Buddhist poetry became one of Silla's greatest cultural achievements. Poets like Wolmyong created verses that captured both the transcendent insights of Buddhist meditation and the immediate beauty of the Korean natural world. These poems were often chanted in temples or sung at court gatherings, their meaning enriched by melodious performances on traditional Korean instruments. The architectural principles developed in Silla's Buddhist temples influenced secular building throughout the kingdom. Private homes, government offices, and even commercial buildings began to incorporate the sense of harmony with nature and careful attention to proportion that characterized temple design. As Silla's power and prosperity reached their zenith in the 9th century, the kingdom became a beacon of artistic achievement and cultural refinement that drew admiration from across East Asia. This was an era when Silla artisans created works of such beauty and technical mastery that they were treasured in the palaces of Chinese emperors and Japanese shoguns, when poets crafted verses that captured the essence of Korean sensibility, and when the pursuit of aesthetic perfection became a defining characteristic of Korean civilization. The royal workshops of Seoul had evolved into centers of artistic innovation where craftsmen pushed the boundaries of their respective disciplines. In the metalworking districts, artisans created jewelry and ceremonial objects that combined sophisticated techniques with designs inspired by Buddhist symbolism and Korean natural motifs. The famous Silla crown, with its distinctive golden branches and hanging ornaments, represented more than royal authority. It was a wearable sculpture that transformed the king or queen into a living embodiment of the sacred tree of life. Picture these master craftsmen at work in their workshops, spaces filled with the soft glow of forge fires and the gentle sounds of hammers shaping precious metals. Each piece they created required months or even years of painstaking labor, as techniques passed down through generations were refined and perfected. The goldsmiths of Silla developed methods of granulation and filigree that were unsurpassed in the ancient world, creating surfaces that seemed to capture and hold sunlight itself. The textile workshops of Silla were equally renowned, producing silks that were prized throughout Asia for their quality and beauty. Silla weavers had mastered the art of creating fabrics that seemed to flow like water or float like clouds, their surfaces decorated with patterns that told stories from Buddhist scriptures or celebrated the changing seasons of the Korean landscape. In the pottery districts, Silla ceramicists developed their distinctive style that balanced Chinese technical excellence with uniquely Korean aesthetic principles. Their pieces were characterized by subtle glazes that evoked mist-covered mountains or the gentle colors of dawn. Over the sea, the most prized Silla ceramics were the gray-green celadon pieces that seemed to capture the essence of jade. Their surfaces decorated with incised designs of cranes, clouds, and flowering plants. Poetry reached extraordinary heights during this golden age, with Silla poets developing forms that perfectly suited the Korean language and temperament. The most distinctive of these was the Hyanga, a native Korean poetic form that combined the philosophical depth of Chinese verse with the emotional directness that characterized Korean literature. These poems were often set to music and performed at court gatherings or Buddhist ceremonies, their meaning enhanced by the haunting melodies of traditional Korean instruments. The court of Silla had become one of Asia's great centers of musical achievement. Korean musicians had not only mastered the classical instruments imported from China, but had developed uniquely Korean instruments that captured the distinctive sounds of their homeland. The Gyeongju, a 12-stringed zither, could produce sounds that ranged from the gentle babbling of mountain streams to the majestic roar of wind through pine forests. Royal entertainment reached sophisticated levels that amazed foreign visitors. Court performances might include elaborate dance presentations that told stories from Buddhist mythology, accompanied by orchestras that combined Korean instruments with those imported from across Asia. The dancers, trained from childhood in movements that seemed to defy gravity, wore costumes that transformed them into celestial beings or mythical creatures. The literary achievements of this period extended beyond poetry to include historical works, philosophical treatises and collections of folklore that preserved Korean oral traditions for future generations. Silla scholars developed new methods of writing Korean using Chinese characters, creating texts that captured the unique rhythms and expressions of their native language. Painting flourished under royal patronage, with Silla artists developing techniques that influenced artistic development throughout East Asia. Their landscape paintings captured the distinctive beauty of Korean mountains and valleys, while their religious works combined spiritual intensity with technical mastery that amazed contemporary critics. The Tome, Gardens of Silla, represented perhaps the most sophisticated expression of Korean aesthetic principles. These carefully designed landscapes combined natural and artificial elements to create spaces that served as outdoor galleries, meditation retreats, and settings for cultural activities. Every element, from the placement of rocks to the selection of plants to the routing of pathways, was chosen to create specific emotional and spiritual effects. The architectural achievements of this period went far beyond temple construction, to include palaces, private residences, and public buildings that established design principles still admired today. Silla architects had perfected the art of creating structures that seemed to grow naturally from their sites, using materials and proportions that harmonized with the surrounding landscape. Even daily life in Silla had become an art form. The preparation and presentation of food followed aesthetic principles that made meals into visual celebrations. Clothing reflected not only practical needs, but also seasonal sensibilities and social relationships. The arrangement of living spaces followed principles that balanced comfort with beauty, creating environments that nurtured both body and soul. The influence of Silla culture spread far beyond the kingdom's borders through trade relationships, diplomatic exchanges, and the travels of Buddhist monks and scholars. Silla artistic techniques were studied and copied in Japan, China, and other Asian countries, while Korean cultural innovations influenced development across East Asia. As the 10th century dawned over the Korean peninsula, the magnificent Silla Kingdom began to experience the inevitable changes that come to all great civilizations. Like the slow transition from summer to autumn, these changes were gradual at first, marked more by subtle shifts in the rhythm of life than by dramatic upheavals. The Golden Age had created prosperity and stability, but it had also brought challenges that would test Silla's ability to adapt and endure. The very success of Silla's unification and cultural flowering had created new complexities within the kingdom. The capital of Seorabeol had grown so large and prosperous that it exerted an almost magnetic pull on resources and talent from throughout the peninsula. Meanwhile, the outer provinces, particularly those that had once been independent kingdoms, began to feel increasingly distant from the center of power and culture. Picture the Korean landscape during these twilight years of Silla, still beautiful, still prosperous, but marked by subtle signs of change. In the capital, the great temples and palaces remained magnificent, but some of the newer construction lacked the inspired craftsmanship of earlier periods. In the provinces, local aristocrats who had once been content with their positions in the unified kingdom began to dream of greater autonomy and power. The bone rank system that had provided stability for centuries was beginning to show strain. As Silla had grown and evolved, the rigid social hierarchy that had once served the kingdom well became increasingly incompatible with the more complex society that had emerged. Talented individuals from lower ranks chafed at the limitations placed on their advancement, while some high-ranking nobles had grown complacent and lost touch with the responsibilities that justified their privileged positions. Buddhism, which had been such a unifying and inspiring force, faced its own challenges during this period. The great temples had accumulated enormous wealth and landholdings, making them powerful political and economic entities that sometimes competed with rather than supported royal authority. Some monasteries had grown so large and complex that they resembled small cities, with thousands of monks and extensive commercial operations. Yet this was not a period of decline so much as transformation. Korean civilization had reached a level of maturity that made change not only inevitable, but potentially beneficial. New forms of literature emerged that reflected more diverse voices and experiences. Regional cultures, which had been somewhat suppressed during the drive for unification, began to reassert themselves in ways that enriched rather than threatened the kingdom's overall culture. The challenge of governing such a large and diverse territory had led to innovations in administration that would influence Korean political development for centuries. Regional governors, many of them drawn from local aristocratic families, developed new approaches to balancing central authority with local needs. These experiments in decentralized governance laid the groundwork for political systems that would serve Korea well in later periods. Trade relationships with neighboring countries continued to flourish, bringing new ideas and influences that stimulated cultural development. Korean merchants had established trading networks that extended from Japan to Southeast Asia, while diplomatic missions carried Korean culture to distant courts and brought foreign innovations back to the peninsula. The intellectual life of Silla during this period was marked by philosophical developments that reflected the kingdom's increasing sophistication. Korean Buddhist scholars engaged in debates about the proper relationship between religious and secular authority, while Confucian ideas gained influence among government officials and educated elites. Art and literature during the late Silla period showed increasing diversity and experimentation. Poets began to explore themes and forms that departed from classical models, creating works that reflected the experiences of ordinary people as well as court elites. Visual artists developed new techniques and subject matters, while architects experimented with designs that balanced traditional Korean principles with innovative approaches. The daily life of Silla's citizens during this period remained comfortable and culturally rich, though perhaps less uniformly directed toward common goals than in earlier periods. Local festivals and traditions gained renewed importance as communities sought to maintain their distinctive identities within the larger kingdom. Regional cuisines, dialects, and customs experienced a renaissance that added diversity to Korean culture. The royal court itself was adapting to changing circumstances with characteristic Korean flexibility and wisdom. Later, Silla kings and queens recognized that their role was evolving from active leadership of a unified kingdom to more ceremonial leadership of a confederation of regions. This transition required different skills and approaches than had been needed during the conquest and unification periods. Women continued to play important roles in late Silla society, not only through the occasional female ruler, but through their influence in family networks, religious institutions, and cultural activities. The education of women from aristocratic families had reached levels that allowed them to participate actively in intellectual and artistic life. The religious landscape of late Silla was becoming increasingly diverse, with Confucian ideas gaining influence alongside Buddhism, while indigenous Korean spiritual traditions maintained their importance in rural areas. This pluralistic approach to spiritual matters reflected the kingdom's growing sophistication and cultural confidence. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through the Silla Kingdom's magnificent history, we witness not the dramatic collapse that marked the end of many ancient civilizations, but rather a peaceful transformation that reflected the wisdom and maturity that Silla had achieved during its nearly 1,000-year reign. The transition from Silla to the new Goryeo kingdom in 935 CE was orchestrated by King Gyeongju, the last ruler of Silla, whose decision to abdicate peacefully demonstrated the same wisdom that had characterized the greatest moments in his kingdom's history. Rather than clinging to power in the face of inevitable change, he chose to ensure continuity by transferring authority to Wang Geon, the founder of Goryeo, who had proven his ability to unite the peninsula under new circumstances. Picture this remarkable moment in Korean history. Not a scene of conquest and destruction, but a ceremonial transfer of the royal regalia in a palace courtyard filled with spring blossoms. King Gyeongju, dressed in the traditional white robes of mourning and transition, formally presented the symbols of royal authority to Wang Geon, who received them with the reverence due to a sacred trust passed down through generations. This peaceful transition preserved the best of Silla's achievements, while allowing Korean civilization to continue evolving The administrative systems, cultural traditions, and spiritual practices that had developed during Silla's golden age were not destroyed, but transformed, becoming the foundation for new achievements under Goryeo rule. The physical remnants of Silla's greatness were carefully preserved by the new dynasty. The magnificent temples of Gyeongju, Bulguksa, Siguram, and countless others continued to serve as centers of Buddhist worship and learning. The architectural principles developed during Silla's golden age influenced Korean building for centuries to come, while the artistic techniques pioneered by Silla craftsmen continued to evolve in the workshops of later dynasties. The influence of Silla extended far beyond Korea's borders, having established cultural and diplomatic relationships that would benefit the peninsula for centuries. Korean Buddhism, which had reached such sophisticated heights during the Silla period, continued to influence religious development throughout East Asia. The Korean writing system, artistic techniques, and philosophical approaches developed during Silla's golden age became permanent contributions to world civilization. Perhaps most importantly, Silla established principles of governance and social organization that would characterize Korean civilization throughout its subsequent history. The emphasis on education, the respect for cultural achievement, the integration of spiritual and secular authority, and the goal of creating harmony between human, society, and the natural world, all of these became enduring features of Korean identity. The descendants of Silla's people carried forward the kingdom's greatest achievements in their daily lives and cultural practices. Korean poetry continued to reflect the aesthetic sensibilities developed during Silla's golden age, while Korean architecture maintained the principles of harmony with nature that had characterized Silla temple and palace design. The stories and legends of Silla became part of Korea's cultural memory, passed down through generations in folk tales, historical records, and artistic works. The wisdom of rulers like Queen Seondok, the artistic achievements of Silla craftsmen, and the spiritual insights of Korean Buddhist masters became sources of inspiration for later generations facing their own challenges and opportunities. Modern visitors to Gyeongju can still walk among the remnants of ancient Syorabyeol, where grass-covered burial mounds mark the resting places of Silla kings and queens, and where stone pagodas still stand guard over temple courtyards. These physical reminders connect contemporary Korea to its ancient roots, serving as tangible links to a civilization that achieved remarkable heights of cultural and spiritual development. The legacy of Silla lives on in the Korean character itself, in the love of natural beauty that characterizes Korean art and literature, in the respect for education and scholarship that drives Korean achievement, in the spiritual depth that has helped Korean culture endure through centuries of challenge and change, and in the persistent dream of unification that continues to inspire the Korean people. The influence of Silla can be seen in contemporary Korean culture, from the architectural principles that guide modern Korean building to the aesthetic sensibilities that characterize Korean design. The Korean emphasis on harmony, balance, and the integration of human activity with natural rhythms reflects values that were refined and perfected during Silla's golden age. Korean Buddhism, which continues to play an important role in Korean spiritual life, carries forward the innovations and insights that developed during the Silla period. The great temples established during Silla's golden age remain centers of religious practice and cultural preservation, their ancient buildings housing treasures that span more than a millennium of Korean artistic achievement. The Korean language itself bears the imprint of Silla's cultural development, with vocabulary, expressions, and poetic forms that originated during the kingdom's golden age, continuing to enrich contemporary Korean literature and daily speech. As our journey through the Silla Kingdom draws to its peaceful conclusion, let yourself be transported one final time to ancient Gyeongju at the moment of sunset. The mountains that surround the ancient capital glow with golden light, while temple bells ring across valleys where cherry blossoms drift like snow. In this timeless moment, the achievement of Silla becomes clear, not just a political success or military triumph, but the creation of a civilization that found beauty in simplicity, wisdom in balance, and strength in harmony. The story of Silla reminds us that true greatness comes not from domination, but from creation. Not from conquest, but from cultivation. Not from power, but from the patient pursuit of beauty, wisdom, and compassion. In the gentle rise and peaceful transformation of this remarkable kingdom, we find lessons that transcend time and culture. Speaking to the best aspirations of human civilization, let the peaceful spirit of ancient Silla accompany you into restful sleep, where the wisdom of ages mingles with the promise of dreams, and where the eternal values of beauty, harmony, and compassion continue their timeless dance through the corridors of human memory. And so concludes our journey through the remarkable story of the Silla Kingdom, Korea's golden age that spanned nearly 1,000 years of human achievement. From its legendary founding in the mists of ancient Korea to its peaceful transition into the Goryeo dynasty, Silla demonstrated that civilizations can achieve greatness through wisdom, cultural refinement, and spiritual depth rather than mere military might. As you drift into peaceful slumber, carry with you the serene wisdom of the Silla queens who ruled with compassion, the artistic vision of craftsmen who created beauty that endures across centuries, and the spiritual insights of Buddhist masters who found enlightenment in the harmony between human aspirations and natural rhythms. May your dreams be filled with the gentle sound of temple bells echoing across misty valleys, the sight of golden pagodas rising towards starlit skies, and the peaceful knowledge that some human achievements transcend time itself, continuing to inspire and comfort us across the centuries. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through history. Please subscribe to The Historian's Tome for more stories that transform learning into rest. And remember that in the quiet moments before sleep, we connect with the timeless wisdom of all who came before us. Sweet dreams, and may the gentle spirit of ancient Korea watch over your rest.